we all have this responsibility to leave the world a better place than when we entered it, and to dedicate ourselves to contributing something.
This conversation was one of the highlights of Bass Europe in 2018 in Lucca, Italy. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and it is my pleasure to bring you this round 2 conversation with Leon Bosch, a bassist that definitely needs no introduction, so I will introduce him, but very briefly. Former principal bassist of Academy at St. Martin in the Fields. He's released, I believe, I think we talk about it, but I believe 10 solo albums since departing from that orchestra just a few years ago. One of the most inspiring people I know, and that first episode that I did with Leon back in 2016, that has been downloaded oodles and oodles of times. It's one of my most frequently referenced episodes when people get in touch with me, and I've shared that link countless times to that episode. So what a pleasure to sit down in the streets of Lucca, having a coffee with Leon and digging into what he's up to in terms of projects that are coming up, and it's just incredible what he's been up to. We talk a bit about routines, and we talk quite a bit about Leon's accelerated learning strategies for learning music. He learned so much music. So I will keep this brief here. Lots of great content. And it was such a thrill to sit down in person and chat with Leon. I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings and Upton Bass. More on them in a bit. And there's a wonderful article that beautifully represents some of the work that Leon's been doing in recent years. So I've linked up to that in the show notes. Definitely check that out and enjoy this conversation with Leon Bosch. So I'm super excited to be sitting across from Leon Bosch, who actually one of my most popular interviews I've done since restarting the podcast, chatting with Leon. And it was one of those conversations I had that, and it's the only time it's ever happened, but I got off of Skype and I went out and I ran 5 miles because I was just feeling extra motivated. So thanks for finding some time here in Lucca.
It's fantastic. I mean, the weather is insane. It's 37 today or something.
I think something like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. See, I mean, I always enjoy listening to your podcast. And I forget that there's nobody on the planet who's done as much for the bass as you have. So it's a real privilege to be here.
Well, I could say the same about you, because Leon's known, and we've chatted about this in our previous conversation, but the Sherlock Holmes of the double bass, and 10 bass projects, solo bass projects, CDs, and you've got many more in the works.
Exactly.
And we're just before we hit record, it's like we could chat for 10 hours and barely scratch the surface. So we'll do what we can with the time.
Exactly.
We have.
There's so much, but one thing at a time.
Okay.
We'll start at the beginning and see how far we get.
Okay. So, what was your last project that came out? Was that the Dittersdorf project?
No, the last one was the 20th century sonatas. Hindemith, Runkel, and Sprongel. Now, Runkel was a composer, refugee from Austria who went to live in London, and he conducted the Scottish National Orchestra. And there he met Nussen, the double bass player, who, of course, the father to Oliver Nussen, the composer, right, and Ken Nussen, the bass player. And he loved the sound that Stuart Nussen, the old man, made, and he wrote a sonata for him called, Sonata Concertante. And I discovered this sonata existed, and nobody ever played it since it was written and it had been recorded. So I recorded it. So that was the last CD, and that was quite a while ago, I think.
So this discovery, that's something you've done your whole life, and even going back to South Africa, I remember reading you would order music. You were like selling concessions at a theater, right? And you would order music from Vienna.
Exactly. And from London, from York Edition, and that was my connection with the rest of the world, buying music. So every time a piece of music arrived, I was living Vienna. I was living London. It was traveling through music.
So how do you discover, like, these recent projects? How do you discover these pieces? What's your process?
Well, I mean, it's like with everything in life. Each little step you take leads you to somewhere you never imagined existed before. If you think of how I got to Cervera, it's through Pedro Valls. And I got to Pedro Valls through my first convention in the United States, where I heard the suite Andaluza being performed. And then Pedro Valls led me neatly to Cervera. Cervera led me to Torello, and so things happen. And every now and again, it's also a question of being open enough to recognize what, the stimulus that's going to take you to places you've never been before. It's like with, commissioning composers. I've just played the premiere of a new concerto by Paul Patterson. Now, Paul Patterson is one of the great names of British composition. He's now in his 70s, but I first encountered him in 1992 when I played in the Goldberg Ensemble in Manchester with Malcolm Mayfield, and we played the premiere of a new concerto for violin and string orchestra written for Malcolm. And I really loved the piece. It was fantastic. And I went to talk to Paul Patterson then, and I told him I wanted a bass concerto. And I mean, how long is it? 20-something years. That's how long it took, but I managed to get it written and also performed. And now, of course, the challenge, I have to record it. But this piece is incredible. I mean, and the reason I got Paul Patterson to write this piece is because I realized that during the 20th century, a lot of the great British composers had never written solo piece for the bass, not because they couldn't or wouldn't, it's because they weren't asked. So if you think of Benjamin Britten, for example, he had a wonderful friendship with Adrian Beers, the Scottish bass player. And a lot of his orchestral music has these incredible bass parts. You know, if you think of the chamber octaves, for example. They're beautiful to play, but there's no solo piece. And I do wish that Adrian Beers had asked Benjamin Britten to write a piece. Same with Malcolm Arnold, you see. I met Malcolm Arnold when he was quite old, and I was very young. And I sat down next to him on a sofa at the BBC Philharmonic, backstage with the BBC Philharmonic, and I said, look, would you write a piece for bass? But at this stage I was so young, I had no influence and no money, and he just probably thought, oh, who's this kid? But I did discover, 20-odd years later, that he had started a little sketch for an unaccompanied piece, but never completed. So, this question of discovery, it's a kind of way of life. It's something I started when I was very young, and I'm always looking to see things that nobody sees. Look, what is innovation? I mean, I have a definition of innovation. It's just the novel juxtaposition of things that are already known, because the same information is available to everybody. It's just how you see it and what you do with it. So I've developed a way of being able to see the world. I have a particular kind of forensic eye. In fact, actually, I wouldn't say it's a forensic eye, it's township radar. Mm-hmm. One of my students points out that when you lived in the townships like I have, life depends upon being alert. You'll be robbed or murdered or harm comes to you if you're not alert. You have to see what's going on. So I'm always scanning. So I often see things that most people would not see because they're in a much more relaxed state of mind or state of being. And I'm always ready to act on things. And that's the other, I think, critical thing, that everybody has 24 hours a day. It's just a question of what you do with it.
Right, and that's something that people have written into me about many times, about how you use the hours in the day that you have and that you allocate to bass. And I remember chatting about, I think I asked you something when we chatted last, like how do you get so much done with the time you have? And you were talking about your time in the academy, St. Martin in the Fields, and while people were out sightseeing, you went into the bass, you unpacked your bass.
Exactly.
And
yes. Yeah, I mean, look. When it comes to good restaurants on tour, look, over 30 years you get to see a lot of restaurants. You don't have to do them again.
Right.
So I made the decision that for the last 10 years of my touring life at the Academy that actually I needed to do other things. And that didn't mean that I was totally antisocial. Of course, I occasionally go for a drink, but I used my time more effectively. Also, I mean, in recent times I've begun to get up a lot earlier than usual. My wife, Barbara, started a course of high-intensity interval training, which happens in the morning. Mm-hmm. So she's up at 5:30 and leaves the house at 10 to 6 to go and do an hour of training at a gym. So I thought, well, actually, if she's up at that time in the morning, I should get up too. So I get up and I go for a run. By 7:10, I'm home, having run 12 kilometers. And then by 10 o'clock, I've done a day's work. And this idea came to me through Murakami, the Japanese author. Murakami wrote this book called About Music, which is basically interviews with Seiji Ozawa and pontificating about music. And I thought, well, actually, if he can pontificate about music, so can I, because I'm actually a musician. He is an enthusiast, he loves music, and he speaks in a very informed manner about music. He gets it. But then, what it was that made me think even harder about being more productive was that Murakami's daily routine is as follows. He gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, writes for 4 or 5 hours, then goes for a run, then has lunch, and then listens to music, reads a bit, and just basically enjoys life. Goes to bed at 9 o'clock, gets up at 4 in the morning, and writes again. And because he has this routine, he's very productive. I mean, how many books has he written? God knows. Yeah. And he's sold millions of copies. And I thought, well, actually, I think that I use my time effectively, but actually, I'm not even close. I need to be a little bit better than that. So I'm trying to be better. But, I have about 7 major parts to my life. And one of the things that's just begun to accelerate a bit is the publishing part. Mm-hmm. And the reason I started a publishing company is because I realized that actually, in the commercially driven world nowadays, that you're never going to get things of value published unless you can prove to somebody they're going to make a lot of money out of it. So I started Musicanti Publishing, which is just a subsidiary to my ensemble, which is called Musicanti, which of course is the vehicle for artistic things. So there are various things I'm going to publish with the Musicanti. So the Kuiper concertos, for example, which are not available, I'm going to publish them all. Also various music that I play and that I believe in, I'm going to publish. Some unknown pieces by Pedro Waltz. For example, he wrote a beautiful unaccompanied piece, Humoresca, which nobody knows of. It needs to be published, but it's in a bit of a mess, and I've tidied it up. Then I publish all the encores that I've played over the last 30 years, because I play them in my way, and I'd like to share the way I play them with everybody else. And then a lot of people have written music for me, and often they don't have publishers, so I'm going to publish all the music that has been written for me. And then chamber music. There's a lot of chamber music that includes the bass that nobody knows about, and I'm going to try to make it available. For example, Patterson wrote a fabulous quintet, not just the one with bass, which we all know about, but 2 cellos. And it's the slow movement of that quintet that is so beautiful. In fact, Tom Martin recorded on one of his discs with the London Symphony. So pieces like this I'd like to make available. So there's the publishing company, and of course, it takes time. But, it's worth it.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Apply graphite, like pencil lead, to the bridge and nut, the contact points of the string, to ensure the strings slide smoothly on their way up to tension. This prevents them from getting stuck and unwinding or pulling the bridge so that it leans. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. It takes time for sure, and a very different modality. I think probably at the base, learning a piece, doing the research on what you might want to play, and then publishing, and then some of those other areas of your life. I imagine running is one of them. The conducting,
yes.
and I know you're on the road a lot, so every day is a little bit different. But let's just take one of those days, maybe at home. You wake up at 5:30.
5:30 in the morning.
Go for a run, 12 kilometers. And then what's next? Do you go to the base? What's the next?
No,
state?
I mean, I do a little bit of administrative work because there's always a backlog of things where everybody wants an answer yesterday. So I deal with all those things. And I wish everybody who has a birthday a happy birthday.
Okay.
And I also do something called Moodscope, which is a kind of psychological test. You try to find out where you are psychologically.
And in that day? For that
day, So there's always... sometimes you have things that worry you, and so you kind of work out whether you're psychologically in good shape to be able to attempt the day. And once I've done all those little things, the structural things, I have a plan, a rough plan, and I begin to play the bass. And so I will work on pieces. For example, there's always a long list of things I have to do. There are new pieces that I have to learn for the future. There are pieces I have to play tomorrow. There are pieces I have to play in 3 weeks' time. So there are certain things that have to happen. So I have a mechanical way of working out what needs to be done.
Yeah, what's that system? Many would like to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a system that's grown up over the years. So I can always, in a curious sort of way, my project management happens mentally. I just know what has to be at the top of the pile. So, for example, the Patterson Concerto, I knew exactly how far in advance I had to start learning just by having looked at the technical demands in the piece. So I started that quite a few months ahead of time, but at the same time I was learning other things and also preparing for other performances, also learning scores. And I think self-knowledge and self-awareness is the most important thing, to know how much time do you really need to get the job done. And I think at the age of 57 I found out what I need to do to make things work. Recently I conducted the South African National Youth Orchestra, doing Sibelius' Second Symphony and some Copland and 2 new pieces. And playing Sibelius' Symphony is one thing, but commanding a performance from the podium is something entirely different. So it took me 2-3 months to learn the score. And by the time I stood in front of the orchestra, there were a few surprises. But I was pleased that I'd done enough work to be roughly in command of the music, and also to have an understanding of what I needed to do with music and what I wanted, and not just the question of mechanically reproducing the music. And this is the important thing. The 4 stages, we've talked about this before, but they're the 4 stages in the preparation of music, which is the expression of human life in sound. The aesthetic one is the one that obviously the most challenging. The intellectual one is relatively easy, because if you understand intellectual frameworks, then you use intellectual framework for analysis. But how to make meaningful those dots on the page, that's the important challenge. We all have a unique view of the world because our experiences are so different, and we need to find a way to express that. And that's something I'm worried about in the 21st century. Now, if you look back not that long ago, in the bass world, for example, there were only a handful of the big names, but they each had this unique contribution they made. For example, Rodion Azarkin, the Russian Soviet bass player, he was Mr. Transcriptions. He played Chacon, Zigornevais, and all this, and he did it with incredible character. And now, of course, everybody has gone down the same route. They're trying to repeat what he did with such aplomb. Rodney Slatford produced the first commercial recording by a British bass player, and also he started a publishing company which made available enormous amounts of music. Gary Carr did things in a unique way. He brought character to the instrument, and he furthered the cause of the bass itself. Ludwig Streicher played Bottesini. You know the disc, Ludwig Streicher spielt Bottesini. But they all brought something unique. And now, of course, we have to ask, what is the future? Do we just repeat the things that everybody else has done and try to be more shocking with our transcriptions, or do we do something valuable? Casals, for example, brought Bach to the world. And, of course, everyone wants to play unaccompanied Bach. But we all have to go away and find our Bach and to champion something we believe in. Find the composer that we champion. So with new music, for example, what I've found, I look back now and I realize the process. The first time I commissioned a piece, I was music college. And it was from a composer called Ian Morgan Williams. He was Welsh, and he wrote a piece called Sglaen and Disglair, 2 pieces, a slow and a fast piece. And I have handwritten copies of these at home. And I have to be in touch with him because I need some of the music. Some is missing, their page is missing. But I'd like to record the first piece I ever commissioned. But what I realized was that when I was much younger, I didn't have the influence or the financial power to be able to persuade the important composers to write for me. Now I don't even have to ask them. They just write without me asking. So now I have the responsibility of playing the music. So in fact, in a few weeks' time, I have to play a new piece called The Song of Bone on Stone by a British composer by the name of Robin Walker. And this is an unaccompanied piece, solo bass. I think I mentioned that word. I'm repeating myself, but it's for unaccompanied, and it's an incredible piece. And he wrote it for me as a thank you for playing the premiere of a piece called Turning Towards You, which he wrote for bass and piano a couple of years ago. He just felt that his mission with the bass wasn't complete, and that because the way that my pianist and I had dealt with his previous piece, he had to write some more. And it's a privilege. So dozens of pieces like this turn up every day. Another piece which I'm really proud of is Invocation for Double Bass by Malcolm Lipton, a British composer who, in fact, I think of as the British Bartok. He's a man of vast stature, but he wrote this piece for me in Sung Sung because he believed that we worked so well together and that we had the capability to express something that he felt was deep in his psyche. And this piece I have to record because he's now passed on and he never heard it. And the reason he never heard it was because every time I performed it, he'd become ill. He had cancer. So when we played the premiere, he was unable to travel. Then I played it again, he was still unable to travel. And he always held out this hope that he would hear it through recording, but then he passed away. So I have to posthumously make this recording available to Malcolm Lipton so he can hear it wherever he is now.
Well, so you've been involved, and like you said, some of these projects go back decades, that are now finding their genesis in commissioning new works. And then, of course, you've dedicated so much of many years, but especially the last few years, to unearthing these works from you name it, yes. Works of the classical era. Yes. And there's a great, I'll be sure to link up to this video of Leon, the recording process for his Dittersdorf project, and the remark was made that there's something like 250 classical era concertos for bass. Is that right?
Absolutely right. Look, most of us during our time as students and also in professional life play half a dozen concertos.
Right.
But the idea that there could be 250 pieces, is just quite inspiring. And I want to make a start. For example, Hofmeister wrote 3 concertos. Some of them are available to buy here in Lucca from some of the publishers. Sperger himself wrote 18 concertos. Is it 18 or maybe more, but that we know of. And Kuiper, Franz Josef Kuiper, classical composer from the Viennese, from Denmark, wrote 7 concertos plus a rondo solo for bass and cello and a harp concerto. And none of these, nobody plays them, and they're actually very good music. So I have a particular project now that I've become conductor and soloist director and all sorts of other things. But I realized that something that gives me enormous energy in this phase of my life is being able to direct my own concerto performances. When I did the Dittersdorf, Ken Solito was, of course, directing the Academy. But it was Sir Neville who said to me, so this project, the Dittersdorf, how did you fund it? I said, well, I funded it. And he said, well, next time you come and do a project like this with the Academy, put your bass down, conduct the orchestra. When you think they're ready, then play. And he said, you know the concertos better than anybody else. Why do you need a director or conduct? And I thought, well, actually, Neville has a point. Sir Neville has a point. I'm very sure to give him his due title. And then I went, my first engagement, proper engagement, directing and conducting, was with the Liverpool Mozart Orchestra, where I conducted 2 Haydn symphonies, number 1 and number 104, and I directed 2 concertos on the bass. And I directed the Kuiper Concerto, number 2. And I came away from that so energized and realized that this was the future, for me at least. So now I direct mostly my own concerto performances, and in fact I'm going to India soon to direct Kuiper's 2nd concerto. But I want to record all of them and direct the orchestra myself also, because I know how I think they should sound, and I have the tempi that I think work. So Kuiper's 7 concertos will be recorded in due course. It's just a question of how long it's going to take to raise the money and to do it all. Right. You know, so the classical concertos. I mean, I've never performed a Sperger concerto. I still have to, but there are 18 of them. How long is it going to take me to get all of them done? And this means, of course, that I have to use this method that I talk about for effective and rapid learning. Mm-hmm. And it works very well. I mean, I often think to myself that when I left university and music college, conservatoire, as a student, I had won competitions and I had maybe 4 recital programs and half a dozen concertos. But since I started recording, in the last 10 years alone, I've learned a minimum of 10 new pieces every year. So that's 100 pieces learned. And I mean, it's as an experiment, because I saw a colleague of mine publishing her repertoire list online, and I thought as an experiment I'd try to write my repertoire list. I got lost. I mean, I couldn't possibly complete it. With Bottesini alone, there were about 28 or 30 pieces that I performed. And the repertoire list doesn't mean something that you've worked at. It means something you performed in public or recorded. So there has to be a real track record. So I wouldn't add things to my repertoire list until I've tried them in public, because that's when you really learn about whether you know something or not. There's so much to do. And look, I'm 57 now. I feel better than at any time in my life. I feel 40? I feel younger than 40, maybe in my 30s. So I need to live to be 100 at least to get some of these things done.
This method for learning at an accelerated pace, rapid learning, if I remember, it's similar to the Pomodoro technique, maybe exactly. Some similarities. 20 or 25 minutes on and then you take a break. Yes. Is that close?
I mean, this is what was so interesting when you talked to me about, we talked last about this method that I had. Yeah. And you said, well, that's called the Pomodoro method. And I was delighted to discover that I'd invented something which now had a fancy name. And it's in a similar way I discovered the talent code when I was a youngster. I realized that talent wasn't a question of birthright or something that you were born with, that it was a physiological process and that you needed to do certain things to acquire talent. So I still use something like equivalent to the Pomodoro method. I set myself the intellectual challenge, and also I have a framework of things, what it is that I need to do with a piece when I'm learning it. Being able to play all the notes in the right order is just the first stage. And, of course, it's easy to stop there because, we have a world now which apparently values that kind of reliability above artistic creativity or anything more beautiful. But the first stage, of course, is just being able to command the notes and finding proper technical solution. And that's what I mean when I say that Koussevitzky understood the bass in a different way from Bottesini or from Severo or from Kuiper or from anybody else who writes it. You have to understand how the mind of the composer works and how they understand the instrument. So, for example, if you've played... By the time you played 12 Bottesini pieces successfully, then you know how the man works, and then makes everything else much more accessible because you know the fingering patterns, you know what works. So you won't go down an unproductive route. Mm-hmm. So there has to be this incredible intellectual kind of rigor. The curiosity also is the thing which provides you with energy. Without curiosity, nothing can be accomplished. There are certain kind of eureka moments that have to happen every day, and these eureka moments then propel you in an incredible way. So never stop working for the day until you've had a eureka moment. What was the thing? I was practicing the other day, a piece that I knew, and I suddenly discovered, oh my God, how could I have been so stupid? Because I found the real solution. Often people tell you that there are thousands of solutions to the same problem. Look, of course there are, but there's only ever one right solution. And it's a question of finding out what is the right solution and why, and to be able to explain in a rational manner why you think that's the correct solution. And so with these composers, it takes me a while and I begin to discover why things are right. If you take Dragonetti, for example, I know I've mentioned this before, but as a kid I spent 6 months learning one Dragonetti piece, and of course that's luxury. But by the end of that process, I thought I really knew the mind of Dragonetti. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't able to test this till 20, 30 years later. And then I now realize why I thought I understood the sound and why I thought I understood the music. And it's a process. It's a kind of intellectual process. And you just know. There are certain things you just know. As a mathematician, if you have solved an equation, you know it's right. Yeah. It's not a question of opinion. There's just, yes, this is how it is. Music is obviously much more subjective in a way, but there are also absolute truths in these things. For example, Bottesini. If I listen to a piece of Bottesini, or somebody perform Bottesini, what does it have to fulfill? It has to fulfill the challenge of bel canto and the question of virtuosity. So, in terms of virtuosity, what is virtuosity? Does virtuosity mean playing quickly? And that's what most people believe it is. And it's not true. virtuosity is the question of the ease of execution of everything. And virtuosity is very different from perfection of execution.
Right.
So when I learn quickly, I have this intellectual. I have to answer those questions. Have I played the right notes, the right order? Have I got the right solutions? Do I fulfill the demands of the structure, of the idiom, of the composer's own vision of the world? And so every moment is dedicated to that. So by the time the process is finished, it can be very quick. Also, memorizing. Look, when you have a few hundred pieces in your repertoire, not everything is at your fingertips all the time. So sometimes, when I'm teaching, somebody plays a piece or in master classes, for a few seconds I might be a bit blindsided, but it all comes back terribly quickly. But most things that I've learned, I know I've learned in a deep manner, so that they stay with me forever. They're not just superficially learned, and I insist for all my students, for example, that they buy their own copy of the music of everything they learn, and they put in every single fingering and everything that they thought about the piece. So that if they do come back to it, let's say, in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, they don't start from scratch again.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Upton Bass. And have you checked out this new travel bass from Upton? Oh my goodness, what a cool looking design. What a great sounding bass. It's just totally remarkable. And the way that they're launching this product, it's just so perfectly Upton. It's bold, it's innovative. You got to check out these videos of Gary Upton unfolding, I don't even know how you describe it, putting together, I guess, this travel bass. It takes almost no time. It is in a Samsonite piece of luggage. I kid you not. It is just a suitcase. It is literally a suitcase bass, but it comes together and it's a real bass. It's a nice sounding bass. It's so cool. Just another example of the way in which Upton is innovating and blazing new trails for the bass community. So thank you for what you do, Upton, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast.
I was curious how much writing in the part, is in those different phases of the process. And where you're at, having done what you've done for so long, are you still marking the part to a significant degree in those? Is that part of the process? Okay.
The first thing I mark in a piece of music is the date I bought it and where I was when I bought it. So every piece of music will say, 7th of July, Tring, the United Kingdom would. And then I started working, and then everything I think, every new fingering was written in. Every nuance, if I change dynamics or whatever, I make a note of it, because it is easy to forget what you thought you believed about a piece.
Yeah.
So, metronome marks. If I decide that crotch equals 104 is a good tempo for a particular piece, I write it in. And when I come back to it, maybe a few years later, I think, well, it's not a good idea, how could I possibly have done that? I will change it. But I will write a date when I changed it, so that you know at what point of your own personal development you made changes to what you thought you believed. And this is what's interesting. I mean, I think that we all have to be brave enough to change what we believe based upon more relevant information. Mm-hmm. So, performing classical music, for example, the classical composers. I played Dittersdorf when I was very young. And of course, I play Dittersdorf very differently now because I'm slightly more informed. And also, you mentioned Dittersdorf's autobiography. It was Dittersdorf's autobiography which gave me a really incredible insight into that period and what it is I needed to go and discover. When I think of Sperger now, I see him very differently. He's not just the man who wrote cadenzas for the Dittersdorf concertos, but he was a musician in his own right. And the other thing I began to realize about the classical era was that maybe during that period of human development, the vehicle of the concertante, for example, was one which provided greater self-expression for artists. And I think that artists during the classical period, despite the fact that they were kind of living in a period of despots, kings and queens and princes, they had greater autonomy as artists, that the freedom, the artistic sovereignty. And in a way, this is something I think we've lost during our period. Maybe we're pursuing mirages sometimes.
Yep.
Or we're pursuing careers, or we're pursuing income, or I don't know what it is pursuing. But there's a wonderful book, and I forget the name exactly, but it's, what's it, the question of the game. It's either a finite game or an infinite game. That's the theory of the game. Infinite game versus finite game. The finite game is the question of competition, that if there are 21 people in the room competing for A, B, and C, then there's a winner declared and everybody else is worthless at the end of it, and the person who won gets the title, the winner. And of course, human life is not like this. We enter this game when we are born, and we finish our contribution to the game when we pass on. And the most important thing is that whilst we are part of this game called human life, we make a useful contribution. We leave something behind. So, for example, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, very much alive, but he will have left humanity with something worthwhile. The World Wide Web, invented at CERN whilst he was working there. And we all have this responsibility to leave the world a better place than when we entered it, and to dedicate ourselves to contributing something. The novel juxtaposition of what's already known about something that's going to change human life. I mean, who was it? Buckminster Fuller who said that we've all been suckered into believing that we have to work to earn a living. And that act alone prevents 1 in 10,000 of us from inventing something that will change the course of humanity. So the way that we should try to live is to actually recognize that we do have to pay our bills, which means we have to earn money, but not to allow that to dictate how we live, but always to live with this dream. Because, everybody who plays a musical instrument didn't start with a dream that they wanted to be a rank-and-file musician in the back of orchestra A, B, C, or D. They began to play the instrument because they had a dream about the music. They wanted to do something beautiful, something special to share with the world. And we should retain that. And it's easy to forget.
Yeah. Well, and you're a great example of somebody who if you just look, from outside perspective at your career, it seems like a real courageous move to leave the academy and to strike out on your own. Yes. But what you've been obviously able to accomplish, with that freedom of schedule and flexibility, and not, being beholden to another organization and the touring and all that. I mean, it's remarkable.
I mean, to be in the academy was a privilege.
Yeah.
And it was a very, very productive part of my life and a very enjoyable part of my life. But I did realize that actually I wasn't born to do that. Mm-hmm. And that I'd always had these crazy dreams when I was a kid. When I first went to university at the age of 16, during the holiday periods, I had this habit of getting people together to play chamber music. And I realized that already I was curator of chamber ensemble festivals. And I thought, well, actually, I'd better return to doing some of these things. And leaving the academy, Sir Neville asked me when I left, what are you going to do? And I really didn't have any idea. And now, 4 years later, I realize what it is I have to do. But I've become so busy that I need to do a little bit of clearing out. In fact, one of my mature students turns out to be one of the world's great management consultants, Phil Hodgson. And actually, it was Phil who made me think a little more carefully about what I should do with what remains of life for me. I just flown in from a tour in the United States, and I was giving Phil a lesson half an hour later. And halfway through playing this etude, which I insisted he played, he stopped and said, "Look, Leon, I know that's none of my business, but tell me, are you happy with the way you live?" And I thought, well, what sort of person asks a teacher that kind
halfway
of
through the etude?
Yes.
Of all places.
But then he pointed out to me that, I just, as usual, flown in from a far-flung corner of the globe, and that my desk was covered in paperwork, the garden was overgrown, and I keep talking about those amazing projects that I'm never doing. And he said, "Look, tell you what, I'll drop off a couple of my books after lunch." And I thought, what? Books? And sure he did. One was on leadership and, and a couple of his management books. And he said, well, next time I come for a lesson, I won't pay you. I'll take you to my house and we'll do some consulting. And then I realized this man is one of the world's great management consultants. And sure enough, he took me to his house and we sat down and he asked me some of the most awkward questions known to man. And I realized that I needed to do something about it. And this is what kick-started me. At the moment, the other thing which he pointed out to me was that I'm really good at the innovative part of things, but I have too many projects on the go all the time. And he said that I have to learn also to say no. So he gave me a gift. It was a sheet of paper folded double, and inside it written in bold letters, "No." And he said, of course, there are different kinds of no. No, get lost. Never, ever. Or no, not at the moment, but, do come back to me in the future and I might be able to help you. This kind of thing. And I've always just taken on everything. And maybe I need to get a little smarter with what I do. But he pointed out, certain things that he thought were good. But he also, in his initial analysis, he felt that I was doing so many things that I had to limit. He said, look, are you impresario? Are you a conductor? Are you a double bass player? What are you? But then, after a few consultations, I realized that all those things are so inextricably linked that I couldn't possibly abandon any one of those 7 core things. And now, of course, it gives me great support. And I have to go, in Britain we have something called an MOT, where a car has to be tested every year to see where there's roadworthy.
Sure.
And Phil invites me every 6 months to come for an MOT to see whether I'm still on the right track.
Well,
so I value that contribution from him.
That's beautiful. Well, that's the thing that people that are successful in something, they find themselves in. It's maybe an enviable position, but it's a tough position with so many projects. So you've been looking down the road and reorganizing and thinking about what you're going to take on. And I know you pushed pause on a few of these solo bass projects that you've been contributing, but you've got some in the works,
exactly.
Right? So what's coming up now in that?
I'm rekindling the recording project. So I'm starting in November. I'm going to do 21st century British music. So this will be a disc of pieces written for me. For example, David Ellis, of course, wrote the sonata for unaccompanied bass, which became famous in the Isle of Man competitions. And I recorded it. And as a thank you for recording that, he wrote me a new piece called Parallel Shadows for bass and piano. So it will include pieces like this, some Robin Walker and various pieces. Then the next project will be South African music. And then I want to do something about Dragonetti. Now, of course, with Dragonetti, there's so much music, I could probably do 10 CDs of Dragonetti and not get halfway. But I'm going to do some of it. Also, I have to record some of the concertos written for me. So there will be Paul Patterson's concerto, there will be the double concerto by John Woolridge for bass and viola. There are also some chamber music works which I have to do. So there's, I have long lists of things that I have to do. And I have to do them quickly. Time runs out. And of course, one doesn't get any younger, so I have to get moving with these. Also, I have to publish all these things as I go. I was just thinking of Philip Wood, a sonata which I played in the United States at one of the conventions. An incredible piece. And I haven't played it since then, and I need to record it so people can hear it, because I'm sure it's something that many bass players will want to play. The thing about the South African music, also I have to record it, because the young South African bass players don't have the opportunity to take South African music and add it to recital they play. They all play Bottasini and Eccles and things, but I'd like them all to have a reservoir of music from which they can choose a South African piece to play. Something else I'm doing in London is I'm helping the South African Embassy to host a series of concerts, lunchtime concerts with young artists, and I'm obliging all the young artists to play one piece by a South African composer. So the recording project is big. I also have a project with my ensemble, which is to record Beethoven in a form that nobody's ever seen. So the piano concertos in chamber ensemble version, the symphonies, not the Hummel ones, but other chamber versions. And also a lot of the new music that's written for... So with the Trout, for example, I've commissioned a few pieces for that combination, and some of them have turned out really fabulously well. Also, piano sextets. There are so many of them, and recently a South African composer by the name of David Ower wrote an elegy which is in memory of Winnie Mandela, who was one of the icons of the struggle. And it was such a beautiful piece, I asked him to complete the sextet, so he's writing 3 more movements. So in terms of new music, I have this responsibility to record also the chamber music works I've commissioned, not just the works for double bass. But, look, if I do 10 more discs, I have to do them in 5 years, because, the previous 10 were pretty quick, and I have to be at least as quick at that with those. The concertos, of course, the Kuipers, they're 7 concertos, so maybe 3 discs of Kuiper. And so it's just a question of how to fit them all in. But it's going to happen.
Well, and with the method that you have of learning this quickly, and the passion for these projects, talk about leaving a lasting impact on the music world and the bass world. So everybody appreciates that. And you have a standing invitation, of course, anytime you want to chat about one of these projects when the next one's coming out, I'd love to help spread the word. And it's just really exciting what you've done so far. And I can't wait to see what's coming up in the next 6 months, 12 months.
Jason, it's always good to talk to, because you remind me what it is I have to go away and do after you've spoken. So, the other thing which, I forgot to mention is that the one thing I always thought I could be reasonably good at is writing.
Yeah.
And not just writing about music, but writing about politics, because, of course, my political life is a curiously interesting one also.
Right.
Having been involved in the struggle of South Africa. And I've just begun to do a little bit of writing politically, but also I have many unfinished articles in music. I use Evernote like most of us do, and I look through Evernote flying to Lucca, and I realize that there are a few dozen incomplete articles. So I'm going to do what Phil Hodgson said and try to complete some of these unfinished little projects.
Well, I can't wait to see that. And we definitely need to do this again soon. Sure. So Leon Bosch, great to chat with you again. And
Jason, thank you very much. You've inspired me to go away and do some harder work. Okay. I'll get up at 5 o'clock instead of 5:30 next time.
Leon, pleasure as always, and I can't wait to sit down in person again soon and chat about what you're up to. It's going to be a great time very soon, I'm sure, given the pace of the projects that you're up to. Check out Leon at his website, leonbosch.co.uk. And again, that article, I highly encourage you digging into it, all about some of the work that he's been up to recently. Welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time or you're a recent convert, if you've been with us for years, I thank you so much for that too. And if you want to help the podcast grow, share this episode. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it in your Instagram story, forward the email or the link to a friend. And if you want to get these updates via email, you can get that. That's easy. Just go to our website, contrabassconversations.com. And while you're there, send me a message, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know a little bit about yourself. Let me know what you're interested in, where you are in your musical journey. Are you a beginner? Are you an adult amateur? Are you in secondary school? What are you doing? What are you up to? I get messages every single day from people, and it's so interesting to learn more about this community, this global community, and what everybody's up to. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Mike Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. Mitch is making beautiful basses in the Dallas area. Look him up online at mitchmooring.com. And thank you so much to Krista Copper for cataloging and archiving all of these episodes. Such a magnificent help and so great in terms of making best of episodes and topic-specific episodes going forward. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you from California, San Francisco, California. Love this place. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.